We have been looking at lessons from New Testament people of faith, and we're in a mini-series that deals with characters of the cross as we see Passover coming up here in a couple of weeks, Easter right after Passover. And so it was during Passover that Jesus died on the cross. And so we wanted to look at those characters that were involved in that process and what we can learn from their lives. John Micah, about 4 weeks ago, said that while we're doing this series, we need to do three things. We need to ask, what were they thinking? And what are we thinking? What were they feeling? And what are we feeling? What were they experiencing? And what do we experience as we think about who Jesus is, what He did, and specifically how that relates to us? As we've been looking over the last several weeks, Lazarus has been raised from the dead, the pinnacle miracle of Jesus' ministry found in the Gospel of John, John chapter 11, and also predicting His coming resurrection from the dead. We've looked at Mary, Lazarus' sister, as she said thank you to Jesus, as she anointed him with that ointment, but Jesus reinterpreted it as anointing it for His death. We have watched as Judas has agreed to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And then last week we looked as Caiaphas prepares to offer the last sacrifice. Caiaphas was the high priest, and his job was to offer the atoning sacrifice for the sins of the people. And what we find in Jesus is literally all the feasts of Israel coming together in one, especially that of Passover and that of atonement, all being found there at the cross. And Caiaphas was the one who would send Jesus to the cross. Well, today we're moving to our next character, who is Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate has to make one of, if not the most important decisions about right and wrong anyone has ever made. I mean, I want you to think about this for a moment. It will be Pontius Pilate who decides whether or not Jesus lives or dies. And obviously we know the ending of the story. But have you ever looked at the process of Pontius Pilate as it was going through his head? That's what I want us to try and do today as we think, feel, and experience maybe some of what he was thinking, feeling, and experiencing. Now, making right decisions have always been difficult. It's been difficult in my life. I know it's been difficult in your life. Moments where you're like, oh boy, what am I going to do? And we end up going the wrong direction. You turn to Genesis 4 and you have the story of the first two children, Cain and Abel. And it's the second really big sin that you read about in the Bible. In the course of time, Cain brought some fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. One of the big debates that always occurs is, why was it that God accepted Abel's but rejected Cain's offering? And I know I was raised believing that it was because it wasn't a blood sacrifice, that's what God wanted. However, God accepted all kinds of sacrifices in the Old Testament. I think the key is this text right here. Abel offered fat portions from some of the firstborn. Firstborn. If you look up here, the word first fruits doesn't exist. Cain didn't offer his best. He didn't offer the first that he got. Abel did. And as a result, God looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, He didn't look with favor. And look at his response. The same response I suspect I would have had. I mean, if I can go back here. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. I don't know if you have a good downcast face. My grandson Garrett's got the best I've ever seen. He'll be turning 6 years old here next month. But Garrett can go from smiling to being sad so quickly. And one of my favorite images of my grandson is him in the corner of the room sitting on a stool with this huge frown on his face because he had done something wrong. And June will tell you, I mean, we get so tickled at him. I mean, he will just break down on anything. Well, he probably inherited it from me. Because June can look at me and go, what's wrong? And I'm like, really? Yeah, your face is just telling it. Well, Cain's face was telling it. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Notice what he says there. If you do what is right. Life is made of choices. We can either do what's right or we can do what's wrong. And y'all, we make them every single day. Cain made the wrong choice. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. I mean, here's God just pleading with him. Don't let it have its way with you. But he did. And he murdered his brother. And we do too. I mean, we just so oftentimes allow sin that crouches at the door, the picture of a lion, hoping that it can devour us. And what do? We let it do it. We open the door. Watch how Pilate opened the door. Never in the history of the world did one man try so hard not to do what was right. You want to talk about opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to do what was right. Pontius Pilate had it. And he didn't take it. Let's go on a journey with him. Pontius Pilate, this is from Passion of the Christ, played by Hristo Shopov. He's a Bulgarian actor. And it's one of those memorable images from the Passion of the Christ that I have. Pontius Pilate is someone that we practically know nothing about. We know him from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Josephus, Philo, and a couple of other Roman historians who mention him only as the person who sent Jesus to be crucified. Okay, that's all we know. I mean, we don't know where he came from. We don't know who his family was. Some people think the name Pontius maybe tells us something about where he was from or maybe who his family name is. But again, we don't know that for sure. We don't know how old he was. We don't know what happened after he finished his service as governor of Judea. He's just one of these characters that comes out of nowhere and then plays one of the most important roles in the history of the world and then departs, and you don't know any more about him as well. We do have this about him. This is a stone that bears his name, discovered in Caesarea. I know a lot of you were raised like me where you pronounced it Caesarea, but it's named after Caesar. And because it's named after Caesar, better pronunciation is Caesarea. And so this is from Caesarea, and it's written in Latin to the divine Augusti, or Augustus. In other words, he is dedicating a temple to Augustus Caesar, who they elevated as God. Julius Caesar was elevated as God. Augustus Caesar was elevated as God. And by the way, you still acknowledge that elevation to this day. If you don't realize it, the month of July is named after Julius Caesar. Anybody want to guess which month is named after Augustus Caesar? Yeah, right. You see, the Romans only had 10 months. 10 months. That's why September is sept, means 7. But you're sitting there going, but it's not the 7th month. It's not today. That's why October is oct. It was the 8th month. Now it's the 10th month. November, 9th. December, deca, 10th month. But the Romans came in and plugged 2 months right in the middle of our calendar and moved all the numbered ones down too. That's why we have the months we have. A lot of people don't realize that. To the divine Augustus. Tiberium is the name of the temple named after Tiberius Caesar. This is part of the worship of the Roman emperors as gods. Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated that particular structure. Now, here's what we do know about Pilate. He was the 5th prefect of Judea. A prefect is a military governor. There was 26 provinces at this time. And about 6 of them were run by Roman governors. By Roman military governors. Why? Because they were the more difficult ones. And so he's sent there to maintain control of Judea, which the Romans considered as being somewhat problematic. He had most likely served in the Roman legions. He's a military governor, so almost everybody agrees that he had served in the Roman legions. He was married. We meet his wife in the book of Matthew. He served as governor from 26 A.D. to 36 A.D. And so he's going to serve for 10 years, which was an amazingly long time back then. Usually you'd serve 3 or 4 years, you'd be out. He served for 10 years. His job was very simple: collect the taxes, keep the peace, and pronounce judgment on capital cases. You see, the Romans took away the ability of local governments to execute people. They said, if you're going to be executed, we're going to decide it. And so the Roman governors in every province they were the judges. And they were the ones who would decide who would be executed, thus the reason going to Pontius Pilate. He controlled the high priesthood. Caiaphas, for instance. He could have removed Caiaphas just like that if he wanted. But he and Caiaphas got along good. And so Caiaphas was the only high priest during his entire reign over Judea. But the other thing he did was he controlled the priestly garments in Jerusalem. That's one of the things that we don't realize. If you go see the latest episode of The Chosen, you'll literally see that illustrated. But they would keep the high priest garments in the Roman headquarters there in Jerusalem, a place called the Antonia, the fortress Antonia, right beside the temple. And so before the high priest could, for instance, make offerings on the Day of Atonement, he had to go to Pontius Pilate in order to get the garments he would wear. It's how the Romans maintained control over them. And last of all, he was removed from office after slaughtering a large number of Samaritans at Mount Gerizim. He had heard that there was a group gathering there. He wasn't comfortable with it. He sent his forces in there. They slaughtered them, and it was such an uproar, they sent him back to Rome. You turn to Luke 13, you see some of that impulse of Pilate. Now, there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Evidently, there was a situation in the temple that Pilate didn't like, sent his soldiers in, killed a bunch of Galileans who were offering sacrifices so that their blood ran with the blood of the animals they were sacrificing. Pilate could be an evil, evil man. And so let's begin where we left last week. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas, the high priest, that's where we were last week, to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning. To avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. They're in the middle of Holy Week. They have got to stay clean. Touching a Gentile would make you unclean. Going into a Gentile's house would make you unclean. So they can't go in the palace. So Pilate came out to them. And right off the bat, you see things turn ugly. Pilate comes out. What charges are you bringing against this man? It's early in the morning. Pilate's drinking his Folgers coffee. These guys show up. You know, he hadn't even had his bagel yet. What's the problem with you guys? What charges are you bringing against this man? They fire back. If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would have not handed him over to you. And Pilate makes his first attempt to get rid of it as he fires back to them. I call it his attempt to evade responsibility. He fires back at them. Take him yourself and judge him by your own law. And of course he knew that they couldn't do that. Yeah, they could judge minor cases, not capital cases. And he knew it. He was just poking them. And of course it begins this long exchange found in Matthew, Luke, and John. I'm going to be going back and forth through those three. By the way, you can't go to just one of the Gospels and get all of this. The Gospels are like jigsaw puzzles. Each one tells a little bit different story about the trial of Jesus. And if you want to see the complete story, you just kind of have to take them and blend them together. And that can be challenging sometimes. But I think we get a good picture of what takes place. And so they began to accuse him. You want an accusation? Here it is. Now, I hope you remember last week. As they're leaving Caiaphas' house, the accusation is blasphemy. That's what he'd committed, blasphemy. But blasphemy wasn't a Roman crime. They couldn't use that before Pontius Pilate. So look at the charges. We found this man subverting our nation. Subversion. He opposes payment of taxes, which Jesus did not. Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God's. You can see him making up these charges. And he claims to be the Messiah, a king, which is true. That charge is true. Because Caiaphas had asked him point blank, are you the Messiah? And he said, yes. And so that was a true charge, just not the way they presented it to Pontius Pilate. And so Pilate calls him in. Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea, Jesus said, or others talked to you about me? Now he's ticked off at Jesus. Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done? And then Jesus explains, listen, my kingdom is not of this world. If it had been, my followers would have fought. But my kingdom is of another place. And of course, Pontius Pilate start thinking, great. They brought to me someone who's out of his mind. And so you get into this interesting discussion. What is it you have done? And so after Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, he says, so you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Jesus said that for a reason. First of all, he was the truth. He was the embodiment of the truth. But also, truth was what's going to be on trial that day. I mean, that was the thing he was trying to get across to Pontius Pilate. It was the truth, not just him. Yes, it was him, but it was more than him. It was the truth of humanity, who we are and what we are in opposition to God. And that's what came out. But Pilate, he still thinks Jesus is a little off up here. And so he goes out and he says, I find no basis for a charge against this man. It's his first declaration of innocence. There's going to be charges, and then Pilate's going to come back and says, no, that won't stick. And so watch these as they take place. But he stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way to here. And boy, with that, Pilate's like, bingo. And so he has his second attempt to evade responsibility. Oh, he's from Galilee? On hearing this, Pilate asked if he was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. This is Herod Antipas, okay? This is not Herod the Great who tried to kill Jesus. He's been dead for many, many years. This is his son who had cut off the head of John the Baptist, okay? He's the king, tetrarch of all of Galilee and Perea. And so Jesus is from Nazareth. He's under Herod's jurisdiction. So he goes to Herod. When he gets there, Herod couldn't be more excited. He had heard about all the miracles, and he's wanting to see, Copperfield do a magic show for him. You know, if you ever seen David Copperfield, boy, he can do some great magic. That's what he thought Jesus was, this incredible magician. And so he's there basically saying, do a trick for me. And Jesus wouldn't say anything. Wouldn't even speak to him. And after a while, Pilate got tired up, dressed him up, made him look like a king, sent him back to Pilate. And so when he came back to Pilate, Pilate called them back together. You brought me this man as one who is exciting the people to rebellion. I've examined him in your presence, found no basis for charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Second declaration of innocence. I've examined him. Herod's examined him. There's no basis for charge. Second time. Story keeps going. Third attempt to evade responsibility. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. Now, your Bible may not say Jesus Barabbas. Jesus here is a textual variant, we call it in translations. In other words, some manuscripts name him Jesus Barabbas. Others just call him Barabbas. More and more scholars are agreeing he probably was named Jesus Barabbas. because there's this play on words. Notice, so when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked him, which do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? Okay? And so he's found this out. Pilate had always, during Passover, released a prisoner. This is now 4 years he's been doing that. And so he's thinking, I'm going to get Jesus released because Barabbas is a bad guy. I mean, this guy's been guilty of murder. They'll surely not defend him. He was in for a surprise. He goes on to say, for he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. Pilate knew the politics of Jerusalem. He knew it well. And he knew that they had turned over Jesus because they were jealous of him. He knew that. It wasn't because he was guilty of a crime. And so, notice again, Pilate over and over, he's innocent. He's innocent. It's jealousy. And then watch this one. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. By the way, all of this is happening within a matter of just a few hours. It is moving fast. Don't have anything to do with this. Look at the words here. Innocent man. No basis. No basis. Innocent man. For I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Romans were highly superstitious. I think Americans are sometimes as well. And boy, when Pilate heard this, you've got to think he's going, what? My wife dreamed of this man? And she's calling him innocent? And so he says, which of the two do you want me to release to you? Barabbas, they answered. What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? And for the first time, they all answered, crucify him. Now it gets serious. The fourth attempt to evade responsibility is a tragic one. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe. They went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. They slapped him in the face. Pilate said, let's take him. Let's beat him till he's half dead. And see if that'll satisfy him. Pilate knows he's innocent. His wife has told him he's innocent. Herod has said he's innocent. And yet he thinks maybe if I'll just beat him within an inch of his life, they'll back off and let that be enough. And for an innocent man, he flogs him, presses a crown. The amount of blood would have been unreal from his back, from his face. They're slapping him. The humiliation is unbelievable. And then look at what Pilate does. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, look, I'm bringing him out to you, bloodied, beaten, bruised. Notice why. To let you know I find no basis for a charge against him. Interesting way to deal with an innocent person, isn't it? Just beat the daylights out of him in hopes that he can finally get this out from under him. It's the third time now that he's declared him innocent. By the way, does the 3 mean anything when it comes to the passion? You think 3 means anything to Peter? You think 3 days mean anything to Jesus? You think 3 declarations of innocence means anything? Yes. As soon as the chief priest and the officials saw him, crucify him, crucify him. You take him and crucify him. And of course they couldn't do that. We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. And when they said that, Pilate, who was uneasy because of his wife's dream, now becomes terrified. Watch what the text says. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He brings Jesus back in and says, where do you come from? And Jesus wouldn't answer him. And then Pilate confronts Jesus, much like Caiaphas did. Watch what takes place. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? And Jesus, I think, with that bloody face, crown on his head, blood dripping down his back, looks at him and says, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Or to put it another way, do you really think you're in control? I mean, Jesus is going through this going, this is the way it's got to be. This is the cup I've got to drink. This is the will of my heavenly Father. And Pontius Pilate, if you think for 1 second you're in control, you have no clue what you're talking about. And that got Pilate's attention. Look at what it says. From then on, Pilate's now trying to set him free. Pilate's trying to find some way to get out of this mess. But Satan is working his deceit in the background, and the Jews are ready to one last time put him on the spot. Friend of Caesar. It was a saying in the first century that was only given to certain people. If Tiberius, who is Caesar at this time, liked you, he would give you a name. You are a friend of Caesar. It was something that very few people got. Evidently, Pontius Pilate had gotten it. Evidently, he would use it. He would tell people, by the way, you do know that Tiberius has called me one of his friends. I am a friend of Caesar. Look at what the Jewish leaders do. The Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. You like to brag about it. Let us tell you, if you let him go, you're not a friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes God. I put that up there for a reason. This is what you'd expect Jews to say. That's not what they say. In fact, that's not what John 19:12 says. Here's what it says. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. And Pilate just witnessed something he'd never seen. Jews bowing before Caesar. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, one last attempt. He took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. He goes out with a basin of water, washes his hand, dries them off. In his last attempt to evade responsibility, he says, I am innocent of this man's blood. Really? Then he released Barabbas to them, but he handed him over to be crucified. I'm innocent of his blood. Now take him and kill him. Let those words sink in. Let them sink in. I am innocent of this man's blood. Pilate wasn't. But y'all, neither are we. Yes, it was Pilate's sin that sent Jesus to the cross. But it was mine's too. My sin nailed him there just as much as the Romans did. Your sin nailed him there just as much as the Romans did. You see, before you come down hard on Pontius Pilate, realize that Pontius Pilate simply represents all of us. All of us stand before God condemned. All of us stand before God as trying to evade responsibility. All of us need a Savior. And that's what Jesus Christ went to the cross to do, to save us. You've got to ask the same question, or you've got to answer, the same question that Pilate answered. What will you do with Jesus? This song, I hope it'll force you to answer that question. And if you need to answer, yes, I need to do something today, why don't you come on down and we'll help you with that. As together we stand and sing.